Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm Crystal Williams Brown. Um, Currently, I am a full stack developer and web consultant for Thoughtbot, which is a consultancy, and the team I'm on in particular helps organizations who already have an app and they may already have a team working on it and they just need more help refactoring it, upgrading it, making some new feature that they're not really sure how to get off the ground. And it can be tricky because you're working with something that people have already been working on, and there can be different feelings of like, are you coming in to take my place? Are you saying there's something wrong with the work I'm doing? So being able to navigate that in a way where you're collaborating and not competing is very important. And I actually came to Thoughtbot after coming through Code the Dream. So I am a former student. I'm a graduate of the program, went through the internship and everything back in the day. And I learned a lot through that process, working with other people and seeing the different points of views that they brought to the table. But I think something that kind of prepared me for that collaborative nature of working on apps was all of the, well, customer service that I did in the past. So I worked a lot of customer service jobs, and you get to meet a lot of people, and people are different, which sounds very generic to say, but they are. I think sometimes it's easy to get in your own head and see things from your own perspective and expect people to have the same point of view that you have and be confused when they don't, when it makes perfect sense that they wouldn't, because everyone is living these different lives and has a different way of seeing things, and there's value to that. And rather than trying to avoid any kind of conflict or any kind of disagreement, to rather just learn how to manage that when it does arise, I feel like that's a super vital skill, and not to be intimidated or afraid of that idea of you may be opposed at some point, that's okay. And it kind of provides you with a different way of viewing things, a new experience, and growth, I think. If everyone agreed all the time, I feel like no one would really grow at all, and you would lose a lot of interesting things that could be made. Today, we're going to be talking about resolving conflict, agreeably disagreeing. So step one is to get on the same page. Now, this doesn't mean that you're going to be agreeing at this stage. This is just making sure that you're not confused and that you're aware of the steps that have led up to the point you are now. Because disagreements don't just pop up out of the blue. It's not someone just saying, I disagree with you for the sake of disagreeing with you, although I guess that kind of happens, but usually that's still from something else, but that may be something that they need to deal with on their own. They're disagreeing with just for the sake of disagreeing with you. But in this case, most cases, you're going to be dealing with someone who's disagreeing for a reason. There's something that's occurred prior to the disagreement. And it's important to backtrack and make sure that you are both understanding the facts the same way. And there's cases where you may be misunderstanding even words. The meaning of a word that someone is using may be different to you than it's different to them. And that could be the source of your disagreement. And you may actually resolve things because you clear up some misunderstandings. So you are, at this point, you're clarifying your understandings of events. You're seeing the other person's perspective a bit because you are seeing the steps that led up to where they're disagreeing at. And you're verifying if you're actually disagreeing or maybe perhaps misunderstanding each other. And this is where you start to kind of work together, where you're now looking at the other person and seeing how they're thinking about things. And they're also looking at how you're thinking about things. You're sharing that with each other. Here's an example. We have Mia, who wants to do some activities for Pride, very excited about this. And she divided the different letters of LGBTQIA into different weeks while we're working on it. This is what she's done. Now, Amber's concerned about this because splitting up identities into weeks, that seems a lot like splitting up identities in general, and people can have more than one. So, they're off put by this. what could be the misunderstanding here? Any ideas? Any volunteers? Let me see if I can. Feel free to unmute yourself, or you can even pop it in chat. No one? Well, oh,
I have some. Maybe they don't want to clan up, you know, with the L part versus the T part, you know, like they don't want to like become little clans, and she just wants them to be all unified, not, you know, not like separated. I don't know. I wouldn't know about that, but that's one of my thinking that would happen.
like one wants to focus on individual letters and the other one doesn't want them to be split up. Yeah. Is that what you're saying? It's kind of hard to hear you, but I think.
No, like more like the lesbian crew, like they're you know, there's more of them, and like only like 2 or 3 transgenders, so they don't want to be like separate, or like they don't want to be in a small group, so she would prefer everybody just to be together instead of like separated, kind of like separated into races, blacks, whites, Asians,
Okay.
Mexicans. Yeah, I
I
don't know.
see what you're saying. So if there was people who identified as a particular thing, to have them split, the people themselves split up into different groups. So this was more like focusing on ideas or activities and having the activity split up based on the letters. But you do bring up a good point. There could be less of one group than there is of the other. Which is actually one of Mia's concerns. So she divided up the letters into weeks so she could spend the same amount of time on each identity, and was thinking more about how the workflow would go and not so much about how it would be presented to other people. So her intent was kind of good in that she just wanted it to be, oh, we just want to spend a good amount of time on each identity and not have less time for one and more time for the other. But not thinking of, this might not look good with one identity per week. And Amber thinks that splitting up the identities is erasing those who identify as more than one part of the community. So they were thinking about losing depth and complexity and representation. And this is where their disagreement has arisen from. So this is a good point to raise here, which makes probably Amber less upset with Mia if she understood Mia didn't actually mean for it to be dividing people up and splitting up their identities. She just wanted attention to be spent on the different identities that was equal. And it's good for her to hear from Amber and understand, oh, yeah, well, what do you do about people who identify as more of one? It's not that simple to split it up. So here is step 2. I want to switch perspectives. And that circumstance we just covered kind of started to do that already, where they were seeing where each person was coming from. And you do start to branch into this once you do step 1 and you figure out, okay, what led us up to our disagreement? You're already kind of doing the switch perspectives, but now you're going the extra mile and saying, well, what if the other person was right? What would that mean? It's important for making sure everyone feels heard and respected. So it's not you just saying you're wrong, which is a big no-no that I learned in art school. When you're giving critiques, you're not allowed to say, I don't like it, it's bad, things like that, because there's a very shallow, meaningless comments. You're not even allowed to say, I like it, it's good. Those are not useful comments. You're always supposed to explain what about it. The blue is a little dark, it's hard to see the letters, that kind of thing. You have to give more detail. So when you're disagreeing with someone, it can't be, I just disagree. It's supposed to be, go into, these are the points that I disagree about. So when you're saying, what if I agreed about their stance, you're kind of forcing yourself to look at why this person made these choices, as opposed to, I just don't like their choices. Why would they make these choices? And you're collecting the costs and the benefits of the different stances. When you look at someone else's stance and really evaluate, okay, what are the benefits of if we go with what they're saying, and what are the costs if we go with what they're saying, you'll often start thinking about your own stance, and you may reconsider some things. You gain a deeper understanding of a perspective different from your own, which can make you improve your own stance, make it a little more nuanced. And you're providing an opportunity for the different parties to change their mind. Sometimes during the discussion, you may realize, I thought that this is what I actually wanted, but now I'm thinking maybe this isn't quite what I wanted. And the other party may be thinking the same thing. Now, you may still feel the same way about each of your stances, but I've seen this happen quite a few times where you start seeing it from the other perspective and you start changing your own mind. Maybe they were right. Maybe this isn't as bad as I thought it was. Or maybe there's something of use here. There's another thing I learned from art school, to not trash something outright, to learn from it, save it, and look for something that you can learn from it, and then you utilize that to go forward. So we have an example of Joan likes posting important messages on Slack. Carl believes that Slack should mainly be used for a non-important conversation. What are some of the reasons that Carl could be against posting important messages on Slack, and what are some of the reasons that Joan might like posting important messages on Slack? Have you ever had these feelings about Slack yourselves? Important messages versus non-important, how you would like to be communicated with? Feel free to jump in, anybody? Have you had any issues with important messages being on Slack, or have you preferred it?
I personally like both messages on there because if they're really important, sometimes they need to be pinned so you can always remember what the conversation was. And then even if it's not important, someone could have the same question as you. But to Carl's point, he may want to have these conversations in person or via video call, like live time. So he actually gets the whole answer and understanding of what they mean.
Mm-hmm. I can see that, like more dedicated attention to it. Anybody else?
Maybe sometimes we might miss the messages, like the important messages. Like maybe that could be a reason Carl doesn't want to the important message to be slacked.
That's a good point. Like someone's out that day, they could be off work, or they just ended their day, and so they're not there when it's posted. Mm-hmm. By the time they come back, there's like a million other messages. Anybody else? It was really good points. We'll circle back to Carl and Joan with some resolution. Now we're going to go to step 3, and this is actually the last step. It's a 3-step program. There are no sides to collaborating. I think it's really important to note that we're not seeking a winner. We're seeking a resolution. That's an important distinction, because when you're seeking a winner, then kind of the solution becomes secondary, and it's just about proving your point, which is not very useful in conflict resolution, and it's not very useful for collaboration or developing good quality work. It's like, yeah, you won, but at what cost? And was it actually the best thing for the project? So what if you won? You know, you want to resolve. You want to figure out, how can we come to a mutual understanding and find the best solution? We're working together and not against each other. So these are some things that you can do to try to help you reach a resolution. You want to gather the facts, data points for all ideas raised. You know, both of your ideas together, just put them together. It doesn't matter whose idea is who. Let go of that, because that's still thinking it like a winner. I want to win and they must know it's mine. No, all the ideas are equal. Do this together to foster that sense of collaboration and write out the overhead, the logistics for completing the idea. And you'll be working on each other's ideas together. Just these are our ideas, and what would it take to make each of them happen? Test run ideas in a smaller, harmless form. If it's possible, you can try to do an MVP, and you may realize as you're working on the MVP, some things you hadn't considered, and some things that are actually beneficial, some things that are a detriment to working on it that would make it a little harder to do. And you may end up making some changes through that process. You can also get peer feedback. It's nice to have that outside perspective. Make sure they don't know whose idea is whose, so they can't be influenced. It's just your ideas. And decide if the point is really worth arguing. Like if this is kind of being protracted, like it's taking a long time, really consider if it's important that it's your idea. Like, does it really matter? If ultimately it's not going to be a big issue, if you went with the other person's idea, let it go. Like, choose your battles wisely. There's some things that you want to really fight for, and you have like really good reasons to fight for it. And it would be, it's a really important matter to pick between the best solutions, because it may impact what you're doing down the line or something like that. Like, there's some really big reasons why you want to fight for this point. But if it's something like, I think this should be red and you think it should be blue, and at the end of the day, it's not going to explode anything, then just, let it be blue. It's okay. Like, let it go. You don't have to fight every battle. You really save yourself a lot of strife sometimes if you're just like, whatever. And then you're like, I'm not the biggest fan of the blue, but it's there and people can use it, even though it's blue. That's kind of like the final step where you just want to get to neutral. What's the best overall for what we're doing? Not who's right or who's wrong. Just what would be the best as far as the weight of how much it takes to complete it and its impact on the end result. So now we'll circle back to Mia and Amber and Joan and Carl. So for Mia and Amber, where they had the perspective of, well, I want to spend enough time on each identity so none gets left behind. So I wanted to do weeks versus identities are mixed up and I don't really want to divide them out because I feel like that's kind of removing complexity from them. What do you think? Do you have any ideas about how they could resolve that? It's okay if you don't. I just was curious if anyone had any ideas.
Maybe it starts with seeing, at least in me and Amber's cases, like how their personal identities fit into the disagreement. Like maybe one of them wants to focus on each individual identity because they share that identity and they want a lot of time spent on their own identity. And the other wants to focus on several identities at once because they have a mix of identities and they want all of their identities celebrated.
So maybe they could do both. One could focus on each identity separately, and then the other one could focus on them, how they intersect, how they are connected, or someone could have multiple.
Yeah, and I think like coming to the realization that maybe like both of them wants the same thing, which is to celebrate LGBTQ identity in the workplace, and since they have those same goals, like their differences are not as big as they might have originally thought.
Okay. Why not both? It's true, because at least it's being covered. That's a good point. Anyone else? That's really good. What about Joan and Carl? The Slack versus non-Slack for important messages. It's possible that Carl would prefer a more permanent or like a more easy to find place for important messages, such as an email or something, where someone could easily search it back up. It is easy to lose things in Slack and not really know how to find them again a while later. And you can add pins, but after a while, you'll have a whole bunch of pins. So you're probably going to only pin a few things. But Joan's like, hey, it's nice because you get everyone's attention right away. An email, people may not be looking at it as much. So you can kind of see both point of views. How do you think they could resolve it?
I guess it depends on the timing, on like how fast they want a response. Like if I need to tell you something important, I might just ping you on Slack and we can get on that call, or send you an email if it's not that, like press on time. Or just send you like a short, like brief thing, hey, something's going on with this. How do we want to handle it, and then, kind of go from there.
It's a good idea, because rather than having it just be an overall never on Slack, have like certain cases where, yeah, let's do this. Slack makes the most sense for it. What makes the most sense for your collaboration? Being able to maybe reach someone quickly at some points, but then maybe if it's something like, hey, we're gonna have a client meeting on November 1st or something, you might want to email that so that it's in their inbox and they can check it whenever, and it's not something you need to know about right away.
Or send like an invite to see if that, works for you.
Okay. Any other ideas?
Could do both. Do important messages on Slack and an email, or however else.
Very sure. You could do both. Does anyone have any examples of their own they would like to share? I know we're like kind of very low on time. Or any tips that they would like to share for others? Any questions?
Crystal, good morning. I do have a question that's lingering in my mind as you're speaking on this topic. I don't know if it's related, but on listening skills, especially having like how would you say it? Active listening, I guess, in terms of not having a have something preset, but actually listening to what is actually being said versus what I want to listen, and making the difference and just really getting there. Does that make sense?
Yes. I think it's, although it can be challenging, I think it's important when you're listening to not be actually thinking of your response while you're listening, to just listen and hear it out fully. Because if you're thinking of your response while you're listening, you're probably not fully hearing what the person is saying, because you're already like preparing something, and your response actually may not end up fully suiting what they're saying because you haven't listened the whole time through. So just to, when you listen, make sure you're not trying to think of a response already and you're really just hearing out what they're saying. I also like to repeat back sometimes what someone has said just to make sure I got it clear and ask them if I heard them correctly and then respond.
Yeah, the repeating part is actually very helpful. Yeah, thank you.
Glad. Yay. Anyone else?
Crystal, just to make sure you know, we actually have until 1.
Oh, okay.
So don't worry about time. I mean, it's fine too if you want to end early, but we usually go
I
till
thought
1.
it was to 12:30 in my head. I don't know. Okay.
Yeah, Weekly Cafe is usually till 12:30 and Skillet is usually till 1, but
Okay.
it's up to you.
That's good. Well, then I guess I'm early. Has anyone had any conflicts with some of the things I've been working on now? No. Well,
This is Cedric. I wanted to say something.
yes.
Can you hear me? When we have the weekly huddles on Tuesdays and we break out every other week, one of the things that I find the beauty of, for the most part, 99%, someone has a different accent than I do. And it forces me to really pay attention to what they're saying. Because culturally and also their experiences are totally different than mine. And so I think if I begin to go ahead of them as they speak, when it's time for me to respond, it's not correct, or it could be miscued, understood. And so one of the things I've learned, because so many people at Code the Dream are from so many different backgrounds and cultures, that it really truly is a blessing. And it also, one of the things that it has helped me to do is listen much better.
It's really good.
I have an example not work related a long time ago when I was learning English. And I tend to use words, and it kind of upset other people, like saying spend over wasted. You know, like I got a person very upset because I wasted money instead of saying I spend money. So sometimes you don't mean to do things like that. There are certain words, you know, that sometimes come across the wrong way and you don't mean it.
That person sounds a little picky. I do think, I mean, it's fine to want to help someone express themselves better. But I do think that there's a point when someone's talking to you and they may make some minor grammar mistakes, but you still understand what they mean. I think it's perfectly okay to just go with that understanding and not try to correct them, because I think that can be discouraging and may actually block the conversation, because then they're feeling insecure about whatever they're writing to you because you're focusing so much on the grammar. Like if you can't understand it, then okay, say, I'm not sure what you mean. Do you mean this or something? But if you can understand it, if you're not their teacher, like, maybe let it go, you know.
I totally agree. I think it is a good point, Alex, about like sometimes you might hear something and really not know why somebody's saying something. Like if you and I went out to lunch and you paid and you said, well, I just wasted some money on lunch, I would, I might be offended because of what that means in English, not knowing that in Spanish it's the same word. So I think that just goes back to communication and like asking, oh, well, what did you mean by that? Or,
Well, there's actually, it doesn't mean the same thing because it's gastar or desperdiciar. But yeah, I understand what you're saying. Like that would be like kind of offensive.
I think, I don't know. I mean, this is kind of a particularly me thing. I usually do try to err on the side of it's probably the most positive thing, like that it may be a misunderstanding of the word or something like that, as opposed to erring on the side of someone is actively trying to be unkind. Like I don't default to unkind when interacting with people. I default to kind and try to find if there's a kind explanation of what they did and ask them about it if I'm confused.
Crystal, on the other side, if I can ask this question, on the other side of listening, and when you're actually communicating and trying to get a point across, would it help to write and rewrite something before you actually just blurt out whatever you're feeling or emotional content you actually want to convey, but actually, I guess, carefully crafting your words on how they're going to land instead of just kind of vomiting whatever you're feeling, and just be more careful. Would that help? Or any ideas on how to do that?
That's a really good point. Being careful and not so emotional. That's like a key word. Because I do find, for me, I think it's better for me to actually pause if I'm feeling particularly emotional about something and wait until I process that and can speak in a less emotional state. Not to say that you should be completely unemotional when you're dealing with people, but I know for me, myself, when I get hot, like I may say something that I regret later and it's already been said, and you could say sorry, but you already done like said it. You can't pull that back. So I would rather say to you, I need some time. Give me a little time to process and I'll get back to you. And I'll come back to you with a little more eloquent statement than my my mouth, because I am a pretty nice person, but I have been known for the mouth. I have a mouth and I will say like the first thing in my mind. And if it's not nice, it will just be not nice when I say it and then I'll regret it. So yeah. If you feel like it depends on you, if you feel like you may not like off the cuff, you may say some things that would not be conducive to further discussion, give yourself that space and to think about it a bit and come up with something a little better to say.
Crystal, there is a question in the chat.
Okay, what if a teammate is ignoring you because you're a woman? How would you resolve the conflict raised in that space? Or your teammate is envious of your skills or relationships with other teammates, and this person tries to put you down in every possible way. I actually worked with a coworker who, at first I wasn't sure if it was just me, but like overseeing him interact with other people, I realized he just had an issue with women and women in authority. And I was like senior because I had been in the position before him, and he really didn't want to listen to anything I was saying. And at first I thought maybe I'm just not explaining things well, or I should figure out the best way to communicate and support him so that he can do his best. But then I realized over time that he was actively ignoring me. In that case, it's best to kind of talk to someone, if you're not in charge, it's best to talk to someone who is in charge. You can talk to that person first and say, I feel like you're not being very respectful, that kind of thing. But if they're very just continuing to ignore you, talk to HR, talk to like your manager or something about that circumstance, because it's not really a healthy work environment, and it's going to be causing issues with your job going forward, because they're making these choices that aren't really based on the needs of what you're working on. They're making it based on purely on some emotional, psychological, whatever they got going on. So it has to be dealt with. I think that's not something you can really force. It's going to be their choice. In my case, he ended up getting fired because he was actively doing things to ignore, like to be in opposition. Like it was going to hurt me, but it ended up hurting him because he wasn't doing what he was supposed to do. So like I didn't really have any issues with him, and I did want him to do better, but he was stuck on he was the leader and he shouldn't listen to anyone, which is not a leader. A leader should be listening. So some people are going to be envious of your abilities and what you can do, and they may want to poke at you or do things to harm you. And that's why it's good to have that structure in your organization where you have other people that you can turn to deal with those circumstances, instead of trying to just wade through it on your own. You're not alone, and you don't have to tackle these discussions alone. Yeah.
Yeah, and oh, go ahead, Alex.
Sorry. No, I was just gonna add to that I had a similar situation on previous jobs that I had, and I spoke up to the owner, and it happened that this person was doing the same thing to other people, but they were too afraid to say something about it.
Oh yeah, and you could be the one who helps out all those other people who are, feeling like they're the only one who's going through it and not saying anything. And then by you speaking up, you could help actually other people feel like, oh, there's someone else who's going through this too, and there's someone else who's like doing something about it.
I just want to say that they're really, really great points. And just to emphasize that there are companies and organizations usually have HR policies, and they are always improving as more things come to light. And so, for example, at Code the Dream, we do have policies that should lay out appropriate conduct and trying to be a supportive atmosphere. And so if there are issues, certainly that can't be resolved on your own, you can always come to, like Crystal said, somebody like myself or Lucy certainly is, as our HR person, is somebody that you can come to internally. But I think those were really great suggestions, Crystal and Alex, and especially the fact that, yeah, if somebody is reacting that way to one person, it's very likely that they are acting that way towards others. And it's speaking up is a way to help make a change for many people, not just yourselves.
The part Anar mentioned about then you'll be considered as a bad team player. It's not a bad team player. That is someone, the person who is doing something, who speaks out against this, is actually supporting the team. That's the way you can help the team. Yeah, no one likes conflict, but it does happen. So you got to be prepared for it. And yeah, and you don't have to live with it. I think, especially like with me having worked in customer service and like retail and minimum wage jobs for a lot of years, there's definitely been a lot of circumstances where I felt like I just had to deal with whatever it was. You just have to get through. There's nothing that can be done, and you just put your head down and you go through. But over time, I've started to see that there were regrets that came with that. Regrets of me not saying something, someone assuming that the situation was actually good and getting themselves into it, like, oh, I'm doing it too. And you're like, no, It's terrible. I'm actually miserable here. Why would you join me? Like friends getting involved and you're like, oh no, because I didn't tell you this was going on. And other people getting harassed by the same person that was harassing me. I'm like, oh, maybe if I had said something. So I decided to err on the side of speaking out. Like I would rather say it, and maybe other people are like, you should just be quiet. And then that just let me know this is not a good environment to work in and I should maybe look elsewhere than being quiet and this continues on and other people are going through it too. And feeling like I would feel regretful. I would feel sorry if I saw someone else going through the same things I would go through, even though logically it's like, well, if I feel bad that they're going through it, I should feel bad that I'm going through it. But there's a lot of times where I consider my misery to be lesser than other people's misery. So like I'm more moved by when they go through it.
Crystal, can I ask you a question? How would you deal with misunderstandings and like false slander? I was at Safeway one time, and I was walking towards my car, and I didn't have my keys, and a lady called the cops on me, and the cops came over, and they said, and because I had my sunglasses, I guess I'm Latino and have long hair, you know, I guess they had a preconception, and I guess my strength was misconstrued, and so they called the police. The police came over, and he said, we just want to make sure you're not the wanted in 10 states. And I was severely offended by this. You know, I was like, I think that was false slander. You know, I think something in their misconceptions, but that hurt. You know, but how do you deal with, you know, false slander and misconceptions that people may have? You know? Yeah, thank you.
Well, because of the situation where the police were involved and it was someone calling in, it does highlight something I want to make very clear. Take care of yourself. If it's an unsafe circumstance, I don't think that necessarily like being the beacon of justice is perhaps the best decision there. If it's going to put you at risk, I would rather you make a decision that's going to keep you safe, even if it's what is happening isn't fair. And there could be things that you can follow up with later to deal with the unfairness of it. But in that moment, because there's a sense of danger, I advocate for doing what would keep you safe in that circumstance. If it's just explaining what was going on and trying to be amenable in their circumstances, even if what they're doing is wrong, just so that you can get home safely. And then looking back on that, I think there's something wrong going on here. Maybe there's things that you can get involved in that are speaking up against that kind of profiling and targeting, and how you're addressed when you aren't actually doing anything that could be construed as dangerous, like how the police interact with you at that case. You're not a suspect, you haven't done any crimes, you aren't currently doing anything criminal, how they should be able to interact with you. If you can get involved in things like that and that makes you feel empowered, then I'm all for that. But yeah, in those circumstances, I don't think that speaking up when you're possibly in danger may be the best way to go. It depends on how you feel, but I do advocate for keeping yourself safe.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah, keeping yourself safe, especially with the cops, you know, hands up, don't shoot. Because you never know, especially if there's nobody around.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that's happened to me about 5 times. That's only one of them, but I was also surrounded by 7 squad cars one time, running after work. I had just gotten out of work midnight and trying to catch the bus. Left my wallet, and yeah, that was not easy. God's grace, I got out, but yeah, thank you.
I'm glad.
Yeah, and it's a really different story if you're talking about a conflict with a peer versus with as someone who is an authority. Like in that kind of situation, it's, you know, that's a totally different scenario. And even, if it's with a boss or a supervisor, I think that's why, like in a company or in an organization, that's why those HR policies are really important, because there should be a path to address those things. And now it's a lot harder when it's an authority like a cop, right? I mean, that's, it's really tough. I'm glad that you're safe, Miguel.
Yeah. And there are, like, in organizations too, but yeah, in the world, ways to deal with that when it's an authority figure that's actually causing it. So rather than you taking it on yourself, there are individuals or organizations that are in charge of handling that for you on your behalf, so that you don't have to go in on your own. It's a bit different. All right. Lots of good discussions, though. Lots of good points brought up.
Thank you for facilitating this great discussion, Crystal, and offering some really great tips.
Thank you. I'm open to further elaborations. There's some other stuff I didn't cover, such as like when there's like a hurt in a circumstance, not using the blaming, not blaming each other, but just discussing how something impacts you. This made me feel this way, and to speak in that kind of way when you're discussing it out. And not you did so and so. No. Yeah, maybe I'll do some other things in the future. But it was wonderful meeting with everyone and talking. This is lovely. Thank you. And thank you for the participation too. That was wonderful.